let's talk about the power of the Plague Marines in 9th edition, and why the Legion of Mortarion is quite so scary to face on the table these days. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics for another faction overview in 9th edition video. Today we're going to be talking about the forces of the Death Guard, who have very rapidly risen from one of the weakest armies in 8th edition to one of the very strongest of 9th. Following their Psychic Awakening update in War of the Spider, the Death Guard were far more of a force to be reckoned with, and now going into 9th a lot of the changes have helped them out. In this video we'll talk about the changes from 8th to 9th that I think have buffed the Death Guard the most, have a quick overview of each of their units, and which ones I think are looking strong right now, and talk about a few Forge World and Demon options. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So I'd argue that Death Guard are one of the armies that have benefited the most from the core rules changes that go into 9th. I would say that one of the most important reasons why they're winning more games is that 9th edition is a lot more about durable units holding objectives, and if there's one thing that the Death Guard are known for, it's unreasonable durability. If you have an army that can march up to the centre of the table, deal at least some damage, but more importantly just not go away to enemy fire, then you're going to score a lot of the primary objectives, and you might be a shoo-in on some of the secondaries as well, such as things like raising banners. In 8th it was a far more viable strategy just to wipe out durable armies with heavy firepower over the first 3 turns, and then capitalise on scoring after that. But now that's less viable of a strategy, as you'll only have a couple of turns left to score with a shorter game length. Even if the Death Guard army doesn't manage to do significant damage to the enemy army, which is unlikely as they still have some decent tricks too, they do have the potential to take an insurmountable lead going into the later game. Otherwise, the buffs to vehicles, being able to move and shoot for no ballistic skill penalty, and also shooting in close combat, is just excellent for the Plague Burst Crawler, and also some of their other demon engines such as Defilers, and also their bloat drones being able to blaze away with their Plague Spitters in close combat. The changes to command points have been excellent for the Death Guard as well. They had a big Psychic Awakening update, which added a lot of powerful options, but pretty much all of these were linked to spending command points. They got a crazy amount of new stratagems, and then unique stratagems for every single one of their plague companies, which were very good, but with elite armies they struggled to get as many command points in 8th, which really isn't an issue in 9th. They're just going to be able to deploy a lot more of these powerful tricks. Finally, smaller board sizes generally means that range and mobility matter just a little bit less. Stomping slowly up to the middle of the board and getting to work with shorter ranged weapons is far more viable, particularly as the opponent's going to be incentivized to come to you now they need to grab objectives. I'd say one of the main negative rules going into the new edition are things like the blast and coherency rules, which can provide you a bit of a disincentive to take really big units of things like Plague Marines, and it does provide a bit of a negative to taking say 20 Plague Marines, which could be very potent for certain stratagems and options. I still think that you can take big units like this, but it is one downside. Let's move into an overview of the units themselves then. In general, their characters didn't take too much of a hit points wise, most of them going up 5 points or less, and I don't really think that it'll change whether or not Death Guard players bring any of these. Most of these, particularly their elite slot characters, provide some excellent synergy, and an extra 5 or 10 points really isn't going to break the bank. One of the main exceptions in the HQ slot was the Demon Prince with wings. He's now gone up slightly exorbitantly and will cost you around about 195 points, say when he's armed with a wings, sword and malefic talons. Despite the over the odds points rise, I still think that he's very usable. I feel that now he's just going to be used more as your HQ warlord as opposed to having multiple of them so much. I think he's better seen as a luxury investment to be able to make maximal use of some of the buffs, such as say the revoltingly resilient warlord trait and maybe the separating plate armour. Moving on to the troops, Plague Marines got a fairly in line with the standard points raise boost. They were pretty reasonably costed before, and they're pretty reasonably costed now, particularly with all the synergies that you can get from War of the Spider and the stratagems within it. The Flail of Corruption went up a little bit, but I still think that it's very worth it indeed, turning them from a bit more of an incidental threat in melee to something that's really genuinely quite scary. I think there's a fair bit of flexibility with Plague Marines at the moment. You can just keep them very cheap to score some battlefield objectives. You could be advancing them down the board in 10-man squads, maybe with a Flail of Corruption or 2. Or you could potentially go all in to try and make the most out of their various stratagems, such as being able to fire their bolters twice, or going for a really big Blight Grenade bombardment. Unfortunately, the other troops' choices in the Cultists and Poxwalkers didn't come out quite so well. Cultists will now cost you 6 points and Poxwalkers 7, meaning that they're really not going to be any good in terms of damage or durability compared with Plague Marines now. I really see these guys just if you need a very cheap screen, or you want to just put a unit on an objective at the back of the board. I really not invest anything bar the bare minimum. Even then you might be a little bit better just going with the Plague Marines, who will cost you a little bit more, but then they will have a similar defensive profile to the rest of the army, so you won't expose a target that will just take all the enemy's light infantry fire. In the elite slot, Blight Lord Terminators in particular really got not much of an increase whatsoever, though the Death Shroud did go up by a little bit more. Again, both have some decent synergies within the War of the Spider Codex, such as the Ferrymen who can give a +1 to hit to the Blight Lord Termis. I think these guys could be particularly interesting when they go up to 3 wounds, as per the Space Marine changes that we know are coming. Hellbrutes went up kind of in line with the rest of the changes, despite coming out of the right side of the rules changes, being vehicles that can move and shoot with heavy weapons now, and also fire in close combat. I'm still not sure that they're the best ones to go for compared with some of the demon engines. Possessed went up a little bit more than standard, and I feel that other armies do tend to do Possessed a bit better, to be honest. In terms of other units, the Rhino went up to 78 points, still a reasonable option for transporting Plague Marines around, and can make them additionally hard to shift off objectives. Spawn went from 20 to 23 points, and can still be kind of usable as a fast-moving threat that can just pile a lot of wounds onto an objective, even if they might not necessarily do loads in terms of killing the enemy. And Bloat Drones again went up pretty much in line with most other changes. I'd still say the change from 8th to 9th is probably a net benefit from them, just due to being able to fire in close combat. For one of the very best buffs in the Codex, I think that the Blight Haulers are looking quite interesting now. They went down from 102 points to 100 points. And now you really can put a lot of very, very tough, very hard to remove wounds on the table with the Blight Haulers. Again, really good beneficiaries of the vehicle changes. Being able to fire in close combat means they can just wander up the board, blast away with their anti-tank fire, then get to work in close combat, and still be firing away at close range with their weapons and their little Plague Flamer attack. Definitely much improved, and I would say that these are downright competitive at the moment. Land Raiders went up by just a very small amount, Predators went down by a very small amount. Both much improved, but I'm not sure quite catching up with the Demon engines or some of the Dreadnoughts from Forge World right now. But Death Guard Defilers going down from 142 to 140 are looking really good. They're 14 wounds at toughness 7 with an invul save, and for a couple of command points you can buy them disgustingly resilient, which point for point could make them pretty much as hard to remove as Plague Burst Crawlers. Again, much like the Blight Haulers, they're units that put out a reasonable amount of generalist firepower walking forward, and they can mix it up in melee quite well. And if they are locked in combat, then they can still deal damage with some of their guns. Certainly one of the more competitive Death Guard units going into 9th. Next we have the mighty Plague Burst Crawler, who did go up in points by quite a lot, but I'd still say is one of the strongest units in the decks. Toughness 8, the invul save and disgusting resilient really does mean that it's still one of the most obnoxious units to remove in 40k right now. Psychic Awakening gives us a way to make some very good rerolls happen with entropy cannons, and being able to fire with vehicles in close combat removes one of the main weaknesses of the Plague Spitter version, which was potentially being locked up in close combat by something durable. Really very solid indeed, and I fully expect to see 3 of them in many Death Guard lists still. Finally we come to Mortarion. He only went up by a relatively small amount compared with his original points cost, but still very much remains a kind of all or nothing unit in my mind. Point for point he is still just a lot easier to gun off the table than a lot of demon engines, though if he does manage to get a few turns in close combat, then his melee damage is incredibly strong. I'd still not say he's one of the strongest Death Guard options, but the below average points increase has helped him somewhat. If we turn our attention to Forge World and Demons, the Death Guard can make some very good use of several strong Forge World options. The Hellforge Contemptor Dreadnought can be a very accurate source of anti-tank firepower, and for just 1 command point you can use that Contaminated Monstrosity special rule on it to make them unreasonable to kill. Leviathan Dreadnoughts might be more expensive than their Loyalist counterparts. I still think they're fieldable though. They're potentially not quite point for point as strong compared with some of the Demon engines or maybe the Contemptors. If you're using one though, then I'd certainly use Contaminated Monstrosity to make him a pain to remove. Otherwise, Chaos Decimator's looking quite nice at the moment. The Terax Drill can essentially be used to drop a unit of Plague Marines right up where they're needed, before going around and melting some stuff with that drill, and the Hellforged Whirlwind Scorpius can be worth a look as well, if you are happy to pay a bit of a premium for some very accurate, very lethal ignores line of sight fire. Demons are still very worthy allies for the Death Guard. Naturally they do cost a few command points to open the battalion now, but they can certainly be worth it. If I was taking a demon battalion or patrol, I'd be very tempted indeed to take some units of Nurglings just to hold up the midfield and provide some excellent screening for the army. Then other than that, I'd be very interested in the HQ choices, such as bringing a Poxbringer along, and use Miasma of Pestilence to make your most important unit -1 to hit, even further increasing their resilience. And you can potentially make some very silly things happen with Epidemius, the Nurgle Demon's Tallyman of Nurgle, as his effects do work with Nurgle Demon units, and that includes all the Death Guard Demon engines and the Demon Prince. You basically just need to kill enemy units with any Nurgle Demon units, which hopefully you will be doing. Probably the most important one to get to is when you kill 5 units with Nurgle Demon units, the toughness of all of your Nurgle Demon units increase by 1, which can give you some very silly things such as toughness 8 defilers and toughness 9 plague burst crawlers. You just need to make sure that you can keep Epidemius safe while the rest of your army is doing all the killing. And bear in mind that you can think about summoning in the Poxbringer and Epidemius, which could potentially be a better way to go, as it could save you the command points for using a Nurgle Demon detachment. So overall, I think the Death Guard have multiple viable builds and are an incredibly strong army overall. For more infantry-based armies, I think Plague Marines are a great troops choice. Blightlord Terminators are pretty excellent for pushing enemy units off objectives, while being very hard to remove themselves, and to support these guys I'd be very tempted to keep a Foul Blight spawn around, to allow your units to fight first, and also to deal some damage with that Plague Sprayer. However, I do think that a lot of the strongest Death Guard armies are going to go pretty heavy on the Demon engines. There's just a lot of good options out there, things like Plague Burst Crawlers, Mephitic Blight Haulers and Defilers from the core codex, potentially adding in things like Relic Contemptors from Forge World, and perhaps headed up by some Demon Princes, who also have some very similar defensive profiles. There's only so much incredibly durable armour that your opponent's going to be able to destroy per turn, so taking a ton of these ridiculously durable vehicles could allow you to bully up the board and gradually grind the enemy down. In terms of strong rules that I think we'll see play, the Ironclot Furnace is one of my favourite rules for Death Guard at the moment. You do have to be the appropriate Plague Company, but if you slap it on any character, then all your Demon engines get a 4+ invul when they're within 6 inches of him. They're already insanely durable, and that just takes it up one level more. They're just really not going to die. For more infantry-heavy armies, then the tried and tested Blight Grenade Bombardment strategy can really work, and with the appropriate character buffs can pretty much delete almost any infantry unit in the game. I do quite like a lot of the upgrades that you can get for various characters from War of the Spider. Now you have some more of the command points to spare. You could potentially have things such as a Mortarion's Chosen Sons Plague Surgeon, giving everyone rerolls of 1s and 2s on Disgusting Resilience, or Noxious Blightbringers using the Demon's Toll Relic to give the Plague Marines around them a 5+ invul save. You can make some very durable infantry combos. It's not 100% clear when Space Marines are all going to be going to 2 wounds, and whether or not it will all be happening as per FAQs, or we'll have to wait for the Death Guard Codex. In any case, having 2 wound Plague Marines and 3 wound Terminators I think is going to make the Death Guard infantry strategy far more viable, as this increase just stacks so well with Disgustingly Resilient, meaning your opponents are just going to have a real trouble chewing through Plague Marines and Terminators. Games Workshop have said though that the multi-melter changes where they're going to be getting 2 shots will be done as an FAQ in the near future, and if points don't change then it's really going to make Mephitic Blight Haulers very scary indeed. We might also see some multi-melter Hellbrutes seen play as well. So overall I think that things are looking very good for the Death Guard, and as always please let me know if there's any tips or strategies that you think could be very strong for them that I've not managed to include in this video. If you've enjoyed, then feel free to subscribe. We do have regular 40k content coming out pretty much every day on this channel. Finally, if you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention that I do have an Element Games affiliate link down in the video description below. Basically, if you're thinking about buying some Warhammer in the near future, and you happen to live in the UK or Europe, then Element is an excellent discount retailer, usually giving you 10 to 20% off Warhammer models. If you click the link in the video description and then buy anything from their store, a small amount goes to help support Auspex Tactics, and it doesn't cost you any more whatsoever at time of purchase. It can just be a way to help support the channel on things that you were going to buy anyway. I do have a very similar link for Amazon in the USA and Canada. Again, if you click that and make basically any Amazon purchase whatsoever, a small amount goes to help support the channel without costing you any more at all. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.